If you grew up in the 60s or beyond, you know the Pink Panther. But do you know the real stories behind it? Today, we're uncovering Pink Panther. 10 hidden facts you didn't know. Number 10. Peter Sellers wasn't the original choice for Inspector Clouseau. Here's something that might surprise fans of the character. When Blake Edwards was casting his new comedy about a bumbling French detective, Peter Sellers wasn't actually his first choice. The director had been considering several accomplished comedians and dramatic actors for the role of Inspector Clouseau. Names like Peter Ustinov, the versatile character actor known for his sophisticated performances and comedic timing, were in serious consideration. The studio also discussed other accomplished performers who had proven track records in comedic roles. Peter Sellers only entered the picture as the production moved forward, and what started as perhaps a secondary choice turned into something extraordinary. What makes this particularly interesting is understanding the landscape of British comedy in the early 1960s. There were several talented performers who could have filled the role competently, but what Sellers brought to Clouseau was something nobody anticipated. He created a character that transcended the script itself. The bumbling, well-meaning detective with the fractured French accent and physical comedy became the absolute heart of not just this film, but an entire franchise that would span multiple decades and countless projects. Sellers managed to make an absurd character feel entirely believable within the world Blake Edwards created. The irony is that the studio's second choice became so iconic that it's genuinely difficult to imagine anyone else playing Inspector Clouseau today. That's the power of inspired casting and an actor understanding exactly what a director needs. Number 9. The Pink Panther diamond was inspired by a real gemstone. When Blake Edwards needed to create the central element of his film's plot, the MacGuffin that would drive the entire narrative, he didn't invent something entirely from thin air. The Pink Panther diamond, that beautiful and supposedly cursed gemstone, was actually inspired by real precious stones that had captured the imagination of the world. The filmmakers researched famous diamonds and their histories, looking for the kinds of stories that would resonate with audiences. Famous stones like the Hope Diamond and the Koh-i-Noor had legacies of drama, intrigue, and fascinating histories. Edwards wanted to tap into that same sense of mystique and danger. The fictional diamond needed to be visually striking, but also symbolically important to the story. It needed to be something that would make audiences care about its theft and recovery. By drawing inspiration from the real world of rare gemstones and the obsessive pursuit of them by collectors and thieves, Edwards created something that felt authentic even within the comedic framework of his film. The diamond became so embedded in popular culture that even today, many people have asked whether the Pink Panther diamond actually exists somewhere in a museum or private collection. That's the mark of how effectively the filmmakers created their fictional treasure. They made something fictional feel so real that it captured people's imagination in a lasting way. Number 8. Henry Mancini's theme was originally rejected. One of the most recognizable musical pieces in all of cinema history came remarkably close to never being heard at all. When Henry Mancini composed the iconic Pink Panther theme, the studio executives and some members of the production team initially resisted it. They listened to that distinctive saxophone melody and immediately thought of objections. The executives believed the theme was too unconventional, too quirky and offbeat for a mainstream motion picture. They were accustomed to more traditional orchestral scores, dramatic sweeping themes that announced themselves with trumpets and strings. This saxophone-driven piece, with its mischievous, comedic character, seemed risky to them. Henry Mancini was one of the greatest film composers of his era, but even his reputation wasn't enough to immediately sway all the decision-makers. However, Blake Edwards understood what Mancini had created. Edwards recognized that this playful, somewhat cheeky theme perfectly captured the spirit of the film he was making. The director fought for the composer's vision, believing that the theme would become as important to the movie as the characters themselves. In the end, Mancini prevailed, and that iconic melody became one of the most memorable film compositions ever created. It's genuinely difficult to imagine the Pink Panther without that unmistakable theme. The composition perfectly encapsulates the spirit of the entire film and the character of Inspector Clouseau. What the studio initially feared as too unusual became one of the greatest assets the film possessed. Number 7. The film went significantly over budget. Production on the Pink Panther began with what seemed like reasonable financial projections. It was being designed as a comedy film, and while not a low-budget production, the studio had anticipated a certain level of expenditure. However, as the filming progressed, costs began to climb. The elaborate heist sequences that Blake Edwards wanted to film required extensive choreography and multiple takes to get the comedic timing and visual storytelling exactly right. The international locations, shooting in different countries to capture the glamorous backdrop of the story, added significant expense. The intricate set designs, the costumes, and the cinematography all required investment. By the time production was well underway, the budget had expanded considerably beyond initial estimates. The studio became genuinely concerned about whether the film would recoup its investment. There was real skepticism among some executives about whether audiences would embrace this particular blend of comedy, caper, and suspense. Would people pay to see a bumbling French detective stumbling through an international heist story? The financial pressure during production actually influenced creative decisions. The filmmakers had to be resourceful and creative with their resources, finding ways to achieve Edwards' vision within increasingly tighter financial constraints. Despite these pressures, the team maintained their commitment to quality, and this pressure actually forced creative problem-solving that ultimately enhanced the final product. Number 6. Peter Sellers' accent was developed on set, not scripted. The distinctive French accent that became absolutely synonymous with Inspector Clouseau. That particular way of mangling the English language while attempting to sound sophisticated and French. This wasn't fully formed in the original screenplay. The character's voice and mannerisms were something that evolved through collaboration between Peter Sellers and Blake Edwards during actual filming. Sellers was a brilliant character actor with an almost supernatural ability to create voices and physical comedic choices. When the cameras started rolling, he began experimenting with different inflections, different vocal patterns, and different ways of approaching the character's speech. Blake Edwards, as the director, worked closely with Sellers, sometimes encouraging particular choices, sometimes asking him to try variations on what he was doing. This back and forth between director and actor meant that Clouseau was essentially being built in real time on the film set. Sellers would explore different comedic timings, different ways of delivering dialogue, different physical movements that would enhance the character's absurdity. Some of the most famous Clouseau moments were developed through this improvisation and collaborative process, rather than being carefully scripted beforehand. This is why the character feels so natural and authentic, despite being so outlandish and exaggerated. Sellers created something that transcended the page and became a fully realized comedic performance. The character's charm and appeal come partly from this organic development where actor and director work together to find the perfect balance of physical comedy, vocal quirks, and comedic timing. Number 5. The robbery sequence took 3 weeks to film the central heist scene in the Pink Panther, where the diamond is stolen and sets the entire plot in motion. Wasn't something that could be filmed quickly or casually. This sequence required meticulous planning, extensive choreography, and precise timing. Blake Edwards wasn't simply filming a theft, he was creating a carefully orchestrated comedic and dramatic sequence that would drive the entire narrative forward. Every movement had to be planned, every camera angle had to be considered, and every comedic beat had to be perfectly timed. The production team spent weeks planning the sequence before the cameras even rolled. They choreographed the actions of the various characters, planned the camera movements and angles, coordinated the lighting, and rehearsed extensively. Then, when filming began, it took 3 full weeks to capture those relatively few minutes of screen time that would appear in the final film. This was during an era before computer graphics and visual effects, so everything had to be done practically. Stunt coordinators orchestrated the physical movements, cameramen carefully framed each shot, and the actors performed take after take until the director was satisfied that they had captured exactly what he envisioned. That significant investment of time and resources is evident in the final product. The sequence feels polished and professional, with every element working together to create both comedy and tension. It's the kind of work that separates good filmmaking from great filmmaking. Number 4. David Niven was Blake Edwards' safety net. Blake Edwards' decision to cast David Niven as Sir Charles Lithgow, the charming and sophisticated jewel thief, was strategically brilliant. Niven was one of the most respected and accomplished actors in cinema at that time. He had built a career on sophisticated dramatic roles, where he portrayed gentlemen, officers, and men of refinement. His presence in a film automatically conveyed a certain level of quality and legitimacy. Edwards understood this and used it to his advantage. By casting Niven opposite Peter Sellers' bumbling inspector, Edwards created a contrast that worked on multiple levels. Niven's refined, dignified presence provided a kind of anchor of reality for the film. While Sellers was engaging in physical comedy and creating an absurd character, Niven played it relatively straight, engaging in the plot with genuine sophistication. The audience could look at Niven and feel that yes, this is a real scenario happening in a real world, even though Peter Sellers was doing ridiculous things on screen. The chemistry between the two main characters became one of the pillars upon which the film's success was built. Niven's willingness to play a character who was being outsmarted and outmaneuvered by Clouseau's accidental competence created a dynamic that was both funny and engaging. Edwards had chosen an actor of such stature that audiences believed in the world he was presenting, which made everything funnier and more entertaining. Number 3. The opening credits sequence was groundbreaking for its time. Before the story even begins, before audiences are introduced to the main characters or plot, they experience one of the most inventive and visually creative opening credit sequences in cinema history. The animated sequences that accompanied the credits weren't just functional necessity, they were genuine entertainment. Rather than simply scrolling names across the screen as many films did, or using static images, the filmmakers created something dynamic and engaging. The animation established the visual tone for the entire picture and introduced viewers to the Pink Panther character in a way that was playful and memorable. The sequences were carefully integrated with Henry Mancini's iconic score. The animation, the music, and the pacing all worked together to create an experience that was far more sophisticated and entertaining than typical opening credits of the era. Filmmakers and animators have pointed to this opening sequence as a watershed moment in how credits could be approached. Rather than viewing credits as an obligation, as something to endure before the story begins, Edwards and his team viewed them as an opportunity for artistic expression and audience engagement. The opening credits set expectations for what the audience is about to experience. Something visually inventive, something that doesn't take itself too seriously, something that combines sophistication with humor. It's one of the reasons people remember the film so fondly and why it holds up so well to repeated viewings. Number 2. The film's success led to immediate sequel discussions. The Pink Panther exceeded all expectations when it was released. The box office numbers were impressive, and the critical response was enthusiastic. Movie studios are in the business of making profitable films, so naturally, executives began planning the next chapter almost immediately. Before the original film had even completed its theatrical run, there were already discussions about sequels and how to continue the franchise. The success had been so substantial that studio executives saw dollar signs and wanted to capitalize on the phenomenon they had inadvertently created. What's particularly interesting is that this was happening during an era when sequels were far less common than they are today. The studio system didn't automatically assume that every successful film needed a follow-up. But the financial performance of the Pink Panther was so remarkable that it changed conventional thinking. The film had connected with audiences in ways that executives hadn't anticipated, and they recognized they had stumbled upon something genuinely special. Theater owners were reporting record attendance, and the word of mouth was generating continued interest weeks after the initial release. This kind of staying power at the box office was relatively unusual, and it signaled to studio executives that there was real appetite for more Inspector Clouseau adventures. However, Blake Edwards and Peter Sellers weren't interested in simply churning out sequels for profit. They wanted to ensure that any continuation of the story would maintain the quality and originality that had made the first film special. Sellers, in particular, was concerned about typecasting and about repeating the same character performance in diminishing returns. Edwards shared this concern from a directorial standpoint. Both men understood that there was real danger in rushing to capitalize on success. Many films had sequels that were pale imitations of the originals, and both Edwards and Sellers were determined not to let that happen to the Pink Panther. They were willing to wait, to think through what a sequel could add to the story, and to ensure that if they returned to Inspector Clouseau, it would be with fresh material and renewed inspiration. This more cautious approach actually benefited the franchise in the long run. Rather than rushing out inferior sequels within a year or two, the filmmakers took time to develop worthy follow-ups. The sequel, A Shot in the Dark, didn't arrive until 1964, giving Edwards time to write and develop a completely new mystery for Clouseau to bungle through. When sequels did appear, they generally maintained a level of quality that kept audiences interested and kept critics reasonably satisfied. The foundation laid by the first film was solid and creative enough to sustain a franchise that would last for decades and include multiple films, television shows, and animated series. Over the years, there would be numerous Pink Panther movies, several animated television series featuring the character, and even attempts to revive the franchise in more recent years. The decision to take their time and maintain artistic integrity ultimately proved more profitable than a rush to capitalize on the immediate success. The franchise became a goldmine for the studio, precisely because Edwards and Sellers had protected its integrity and refused to compromise quality for quick profits. Number 1. The film's humor transcended language barriers. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Pink Panther's extraordinary success internationally was how effectively its comedy translated across different languages and cultures. The film became a massive hit not just in English-speaking countries but around the world. This wasn't accidental. It was actually quite intentional on Blake Edwards' part. Edwards understood that the best kind of comedy, particularly physical comedy and slapstick, could communicate across language barriers. When Inspector Clouseau falls over, when he stumbles into things, when he causes chaos through his bumbling incompetence, audiences everywhere understand the humor. Edwards deliberately created sequences that relied on physical comedy and visual gags, rather than dialogue-dependent humor or wordplay that might not translate. A person watching in Japan, in France, in Germany, or in Argentina could laugh at the same moment that someone in America was laughing, even if they weren't hearing the dialogue clearly or didn't fully understand every word of English or French spoken on screen. The slapstick sequences, the visual humor, and the physical performance of the actors communicated meaning that transcended language. This approach to filmmaking made the Pink Panther genuinely universal entertainment. Think about the scene where Clouseau is trying to investigate something and accidentally destroys objects around him. The comedy doesn't depend on a particular language or cultural reference. It's pure visual storytelling. Audiences in different countries might not understand every spoken line of dialogue, but they understand the physical comedy of someone causing chaos through incompetence. This was particularly valuable in an era before dubbed films were common, and before subtitles had become standardized in most theaters. Many international audiences were watching the film with limited language support, yet they were laughing just as heartily as English-speaking audiences. This universal quality also meant that the film didn't require massive changes or re-editing for different markets. While some films in that era needed significant modifications for international release, the Pink Panther's comedy was robust enough to work across cultural boundaries without compromise. The film played in Europe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa with tremendous success. It became one of the biggest international hits of its time, largely because people from vastly different cultural backgrounds could all enjoy it together. The comedic style Edwards chose also reflected a kind of international sophistication. The film features international locations, an international cast of characters, and a story involving art theft and jewel heists that had universal appeal. Even the visual style, the elegant settings, the sophisticated wardrobe, the glamorous locations, created a fantasy world that audiences everywhere could appreciate and enjoy. There was something about the combination of sophistication and absurdity that resonated globally. It's one of the reasons why the Pink Panther remains beloved across generations and continents. It's not bound by language or cultural specifics. It's rooted in the universal human experience of recognizing absurdity and finding humor in chaos and incompetence. The film proved that comedy, when executed with intelligence and care, could be a truly universal language. This is a lesson that filmmakers have taken to heart ever since. That visual storytelling and physical performance can often communicate more effectively than dialogue alone. Those are 10 fascinating facts about a film that changed comedy forever. The Pink Panther is a masterclass in filmmaking. From the performances to the direction to the music. Every choice, every decision made by Blake Edwards and his team contributed to creating something that has endured for decades. The film continues to be watched, enjoyed, and appreciated by new generations of viewers who discover that the humor, the charm, and the creativity that went into making it remain as fresh and engaging today as they were when audiences first saw it on the big screen. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden facts about the Pink Panther, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more classic Hollywood stories and forgotten cinema secrets. Thank you for watching.